She was left for dead by settlers until a young Apache found the silent widow who'd given up. A 6-chapter Western survival story. Chapter 1. The Last Stand. The dust hadn't settled yet when Martha Whitmore realized she was going to die alone. The wagon lay overturned beside her, its wooden wheels still spinning lazily in the hot Texas sun. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of blood that pooled beneath her husband's lifeless body. James had tried to shield her when the raiders came. Men she'd recognized from town, men who'd shared drinks with her husband at the saloon just weeks before. "Should have minded your own business about the Apache treaties, Whitmore," one of them had spat before putting a bullet in James's chest. Martha pressed her palm against the gash along her ribs where a knife had found its mark. The wound wasn't deep enough to kill her quickly, but out here, 20 miles from the nearest settlement, it might as well have been a death sentence. Her voice had been taken from her by scarlet fever 3 winters ago, leaving her unable to call for help even if anyone was within earshot. The raiders had searched their belongings, taking what little money they had and the deed to their small ranch. They'd left her for dead, a reasonable assumption, given the blood loss and the unforgiving Texas landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. As the sun climbed higher, Martha crawled toward the meager shade of the overturned wagon. Her calico dress, once a cheerful blue, was now stained dark with dirt and blood. The silence was absolute except for the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead, already sensing death. She thought of her sister back in Missouri, who'd begged her not to come west. "Nothing good ever comes from chasing dreams in that godforsaken wilderness," Elizabeth had warned. Martha had been so certain then, so full of hope about the life she and James would build together. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, who could no longer speak, would die without ever having the chance to tell anyone what really happened here. The raiders would return to town with some story about Apache raids, and no one would question it. The truth would die with her in this desolate stretch of prairie. As the afternoon wore on, Martha felt her strength ebbing away like water through cupped hands. She'd made peace with death once before, when the fever had taken her voice. Now, she found that same strange calm settling over her as she watched the shadows lengthen across the Texas landscape. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Or perhaps it was just the fever dreams beginning. Chapter 2. The Finder. Ayanna had been tracking the deer for 3 hours when she found the white woman dying beside the overturned wagon. The 18-year-old Apache moved with the fluid grace her grandfather had taught her, reading the land like others read books. She'd been hunting alone, something her father disapproved of, but which she did anyway when the restlessness became too much to bear. The reservation boundaries felt like invisible shackles, and these solo hunts were her only taste of the freedom her people had once known. She approached the scene with caution, her hand resting on the knife at her belt. The smell of death was thick in the air, but beneath it, she detected something else. The shallow, labored breathing of someone still clinging to life. The woman was small, probably no older than 25, with auburn hair that had escaped its pins and lay tangled around her pale face. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, and the wound on her side had attracted flies, despite her weak attempts to brush them away. Ayanna knelt beside her, studying the scene with the analytical eye her grandfather had trained in her. The wagon's contents were scattered, clearly searched and looted. The man's body showed a single gunshot wound to the chest, but there were no arrows, no signs of the ritualistic violence that white settlers always claimed accompanied Apache raids. This had been the work of white men, not her people. The woman's eyes fluttered open, startling Ayanna. They were the color of winter sky, pale blue, and filled with a resignation that made the young Apache's chest tighten. The woman's lips moved, but no sound emerged. She tried again, her face contorting with effort and frustration. "You cannot speak," Ayanna said in halting English, a language she'd learned from the missionary who sometimes visited their reservation. The woman's eyes widened with surprise, then she nodded once. Ayanna had every reason to leave this woman to die. Her people had been driven from their ancestral lands by settlers just like this one. Her own grandmother had been killed in a raid by white soldiers when Ayanna was only 10. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to take what she needed from the wagon and continue on her way. But as she looked into those desperate blue eyes, Ayana saw something that transcended the color of skin or the history of blood between their peoples. She saw another human being abandoned to die alone, and her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The measure of a person is not in their strength, but in their kindness to those who cannot help themselves. I will not leave you, Ayana said, switching to Apache before repeating it in English. You understand? The woman nodded again, and tears began to track down her dust-stained cheeks, the first sign of hope Ayana had seen in those pale eyes. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Ayana made her decision. She would save this white woman's life, even if it meant risking her own in the process. Chapter 3. The Healing. Martha drifted in and out of consciousness as the young Apache woman worked to save her life. Through the haze of fever and pain, she caught glimpses of her unlikely savior. The girl, for she couldn't be more than 18, moved with purposeful efficiency, her long black hair braided with small beads that caught the fading sunlight. She'd built a small fire using dried buffalo chips and sparse brush, and was now cleaning Martha's wound with water from a leather pouch. This will hurt, the girl said in careful English, and Martha braced herself as best she could. The pain was immediate and intense as the Apache girl cleaned away the dried blood and dirt. Martha bit down on the leather strip the girl had given her back arching involuntarily. But she could see the necessity in those dark, serious eyes. Infection would kill her faster than the wound itself. I am Ayana, the girl said as she worked, her voice soft but steady. It means eternal blossom in my tongue. What are you called? Martha tried to speak, forgetting, as she always did, that no sound would come. She touched her throat and shook her head, then pressed her palm to her chest. You have a name, Ayana said, understanding, but you cannot say it. Martha nodded, then slowly traced letters in the dirt beside her. M-A-R-T-H-A. Martha, Ayana pronounced carefully, and Martha nodded again. It had been months since anyone had spoken her name with such care. As night fell, Ayana made a difficult decision. The woman, Martha, needed medicine and proper shelter to survive, but they were too far from any white settlement, and bringing her to the reservation would be impossible. There was only one option. There is a place, Ayana said, as she applied a poultice made from herbs to Martha's wound. A cave in the rocks, half a day's ride north. My grandfather showed it to me when I was young. It has fresh water and shelter from the wind. Martha's eyes showed understanding and perhaps a flicker of fear. She would be completely dependent on this stranger, this enemy according to everything she'd been taught about Apache people. You are afraid, Ayana observed, securing the bandage with strips torn from Martha's petticoat. This is wise. My people have reason to hate yours, as yours have reason to hate mine. Martha met her eyes directly, and in that moment, something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the impossible situation they found themselves in. But hate is a heavy burden, Ayana continued, and we both have enough weight to carry. Over the next several hours, Ayana prepared for the journey. She'd managed to salvage some supplies from the wagon, a small pot, some dried beans, Martha's sewing kit, and a worn Bible that had belonged to her husband. She also found a letter tucked inside the Bible, written in a woman's careful script. Your sister? Ayana asked, and Martha nodded, fresh tears starting at the sight of Elizabeth's familiar handwriting. As dawn approached, Ayana helped Martha into the saddle of her own horse, a sturdy pinto that had been her grandfather's. Martha was weak but determined, and Ayana was impressed by her grit. Many people, white or Apache, would have given up by now. Hold tight, Ayana said, swinging up behind her. We have a long ride ahead. As they rode north toward the hidden canyon, Martha leaned back against the young woman who had chosen to save her life. The irony wasn't lost on her that the only person who'd shown her kindness in this brutal land was someone her own people would shoot on sight. Chapter 4. The Refuge. The hidden canyon was everything Ayana had promised and more. Carved into the red sandstone cliffs by centuries of wind and water, The cave system provided natural shelter from the elements, while a small spring bubbled up from deep underground. Ancient Apache symbols were painted on the walls, handprints and animal figures that spoke of her people's long history in this land. "My grandfather's grandfather came here," Ayana explained as she helped Martha from the horse. "When the soldiers came, some of our people hid in these caves. The entrance is hidden from below. No one can find it who does not know the way." Martha looked around with wonder despite her exhaustion. The cave was larger than it appeared from outside, with several chambers extending back into the cliff face. The main chamber was spacious enough to stand upright, and smoke from a small fire would be dispersed through natural vents in the rock. Over the following days, Ayana proved to be a skilled healer. She changed Martha's bandages daily, applying fresh poultices made from plants she gathered in the canyon. She made bone broth from a rabbit she'd caught and showed Martha how to prepare prickly pear cactus pads to prevent scurvy. "Your people think we are savages," Ayana said one evening as they sat by the fire, "but we have lived in this land for more generations than can be counted. We know its secrets." Martha nodded, her understanding of the Apache girl growing daily. She'd been taught that Indians were bloodthirsty killers, but Ayana had shown her nothing but kindness and competence. The girl spoke 3 languages, knew more about medicine than most white doctors, and could survive in conditions that would kill a settlement-raised person within days. Communication between them developed its own rhythm. Martha had learned to use simple gestures and expressions to convey basic needs and emotions. Ayana, for her part, seemed to understand her silent companion with an intuitive ease that reminded Martha of how she and James had communicated after she'd lost her voice. "You were happy with your husband," Ayana observed one morning as Martha carefully mended a tear in her dress with supplies from her sewing kit. Martha nodded, then touched her throat and shook her head sadly. "He loved you even when you could not speak," Ayana said. It wasn't a question. Martha's eyes filled with tears as she nodded again. James had been one of the few people who'd never treated her differently after the fever. He'd learned to read her expressions, to understand her gestures, to include her in conversations even when she couldn't contribute verbally. "This is true love," Ayana said. "My grandmother told me that words are the least important part of speaking. The heart speaks louder than the tongue." As Martha's strength returned, she began to help with daily tasks. She proved surprisingly adaptable, learning to prepare Apache foods and even helping Ayana set snares for small game. The physical work felt good after weeks of lying still, and she found herself growing stronger each day. But it was the emotional healing that surprised her most. For the first time since losing her voice, Martha felt truly understood by another person. Ayana never showed impatience when Martha struggled to communicate something complex, never finished her sentences for her, never talked around her as if she weren't there. "Why did you save me?" Martha asked one evening, using the simple sign language they'd developed between them. Ayana was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "My grandfather taught me that we are all connected. The Apache, the white man, the Mexican, the buffalo, the eagle. When one suffers, we all suffer. When one is healed, we all are healed." She looked at Martha directly. "Also, I know what it is like to be alone. After my grandmother died, I had no one who understood my anger. My father wanted me to accept our life on the reservation, to make peace with our confinement, but I could not. I still cannot." Martha reached out and touched Ayana's hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. In that moment, she understood that they were both refugees from their own worlds, finding solace in their unlikely friendship. Chapter 5. The Test 3. Weeks into their stay at the canyon, their peaceful refuge was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Ayana heard them first, her hand instantly moving to her knife as she signaled for Martha to stay low. The young Apache crept to the cave entrance, peering carefully around the concealing rocks. Below in the canyon, she could see 6 riders picking their way along the stream bed, white men, armed, and leading them was a face she recognized from her brief visits to the territorial capital, Marshal Tom Bradley, a man known for his particular hatred of Apache people. "Tracks lead up this way," one of the men called out. 2 riders, 1 horse, Martha crawled to Ayana's side, her face pale with fear. She'd recognized the voices too. Some of these were the same men who'd killed her husband and left her for dead. "Jake Morrison," Ayana whispered, pointing to a heavy-set man with a distinctive red beard. "He was one of them?" Martha nodded, her hands shaking as she gripped the young woman's arm. "The Apache girl couldn't have gotten far with a wounded white woman," Marshal Bradley said, his voice carrying clearly in the canyon's acoustics. "Check every cave, every overhang. The territorial governor wants this handled quietly." Ayana's blood ran cold. Somehow, they discovered that she'd saved Martha. This wasn't just a search party, it was a hunting party, and they were the prey. "We need to go deeper," Ayana whispered, but Martha shook her head and pointed to herself, then to the cave entrance. "No," Ayana said firmly, "I will not leave you." Martha's eyes filled with tears as she signed desperately, trying to make Ayana understand that she was willing to sacrifice herself to save her friend. "Listen to me," Ayana said, gripping Martha's shoulders. "My grandfather told me that the greatest dishonor is to abandon those who depend on us. You are my responsibility now. We survive together or not at all." The sound of boots on rock grew closer. Ayana made a quick decision, leading Martha to the deepest chamber of the cave system, where a narrow passage connected to another exit on the far side of the cliff. It was a dangerous climb, but their only chance. "Can you make it?" Ayana whispered. Martha nodded, though her face showed her fear. The wound in her side was still tender, and the climb would be treacherous. They began the ascent through the narrow passage, Martha following Ayana's lead. Behind them, they could hear the men entering the main cave, their voices echoing off the stone walls. "Fresh ashes in the fire pit," one of them called out. "They were here recently." "Spread out," Bradley ordered. "Check every passage." Halfway through the climb, Martha's strength gave out. Her foot slipped on the smooth rock, and she would have fallen if Ayana hadn't caught her arm. "I cannot," Martha signed, her face gray with exhaustion and pain. "Yes, you can," Ayana whispered fiercely. "You are stronger than you know. Your husband believed in you. I believe in you." The sound of pursuit grew closer. Martha looked into Ayana's determined face and found her own courage. She had survived the fever that took her voice, survived the attack that killed her husband, survived weeks in the wilderness. She would not give up now. With Ayana's help, she completed the climb just as the searchers reached the narrow passage behind them. They emerged onto a hidden ledge on the backside of the cliff, invisible from below. "They'll search all day," Ayana whispered as they caught their breath in the shelter of some scrub brush. "But they won't find the other entrance. We're safe for now." Martha looked at her friend with profound gratitude. This young woman had risked everything to save her and continued to risk everything to keep her alive. Whatever happened next, she would not forget this debt. As the sun began to set, they heard the search party finally giving up and riding away. But both women knew this was far from over. They'd been discovered, and there would be others coming. Their time of healing in the canyon was over. Now they had to decide what came next. Chapter 6. The Choice. The decision came to Martha in the quiet hours before dawn, as she sat watching Ayana sleep beside the dying embers of their small fire. They'd returned to the cave after the search party left, but both women knew they couldn't stay. It was only a matter of time before more searchers came, and next time they might not be so lucky. Ayana had been preparing for this moment, Martha realized. The young Apache had been teaching her survival skills, sharing the knowledge of her people, preparing her for a life that neither of them had imagined when they first met. "You are awake," Ayana said softly, her eyes opening in the pre-dawn darkness. Martha nodded, then moved to sit beside her friend. Using their developed sign language, she began to communicate something that had been growing in her heart for days. "You want to come with me?" Ayana said, understanding. "To my people." Martha nodded again, then touched her chest and pointed to Ayana, a gesture that had come to mean, "You are my family now." Ayana was quiet for a long moment. "It will not be easy. My people have good reason to distrust whites, and your people," she gestured toward the canyon mouth where the search party had appeared. "They think you are dead," Martha signed. "Let them think it." "And your sister in Missouri?" Martha's face showed pain at the thought of Elizabeth, but she shook her head firmly. She couldn't go back to that life, not after everything that had happened, not after everything she'd learned about herself and the world. You could have a new life, Ayanna said carefully, but it would mean leaving everything you were behind. Martha stood and walked to the cave entrance, looking out over the vast Texas landscape that had tested her so thoroughly. When she turned back, her expression was resolute. "I was dead," she signed. "You gave me life. Now I choose how to live it." Ayanna smiled, the first truly joyful expression Martha had seen from her. "Then we ride south to the winter camp, but first we must make you ready." Over the next several days, Ayanna began Martha's transformation. She taught her to braid her hair in the Apache style, to move silently through brush, to read the signs of weather and wildlife. Martha proved an eager student, her natural intelligence and determination making up for her lack of wilderness experience. "You will be my cousin," Ayanna explained as she worked on Martha's hair, "a distant relative whose family was killed in a raid. Your inability to speak will be explained by the trauma. It happens sometimes." Martha nodded, understanding the story they would tell. "My grandfather is wise," Ayanna continued. "He will see your heart, not your skin. But others may not be so accepting." "I understand," Martha signed. "I am willing to try." On their last morning in the canyon, Martha performed a ritual of her own. She took her wedding ring, the one piece of jewelry she'd managed to keep, and placed it on a small stone altar beneath the ancient handprints on the cave wall. "Goodbye, James," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't need words." Ayanna watched respectfully as Martha said farewell to her old life. When her friend was ready, she helped her onto the horse they now shared. "Are you sure?" Ayanna asked one final time. Martha looked back at the canyon that had been their refuge, then forward toward the uncertain future that awaited them. She thought of the woman she'd been, silent, dependent, defined by her losses. That woman had died beside the overturned wagon. The woman who rode out of the canyon that morning was someone new entirely, someone who had learned that strength came not from the ability to speak, but from the courage to choose one's own path. "Yes," Martha signed, her hands steady and sure. "I am ready." As they rode toward the horizon, two women from different worlds who had found in each other something neither had expected to find: hope, understanding, and the possibility of belonging somewhere new. Behind them, the canyon kept its secrets, as it had for generations. But the story of what happened there would live on in the hearts of two survivors who had learned that family isn't always about blood, and home isn't always about place. Sometimes it's about finding someone who sees your worth when you've forgotten it yourself. End of story. Author's note: this story explores themes of survival, cross-cultural understanding, and the power of human connection in the face of adversity. Set in the harsh realities of 1880s Texas, it shows how two women from vastly different backgrounds can find common ground and mutual support when faced with life-threatening circumstances. The narrative avoids romanticizing the brutal realities of frontier life while highlighting the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of healing even in the most challenging circumstances. Martha's journey from victim to survivor to someone who actively chooses her own destiny reflects the transformative power of finding true acceptance and understanding. Similarly, Ayanna's decision to save Martha despite the risks represents the kind of moral courage that transcends cultural boundaries and historical grievances. Their friendship becomes a small but significant act of healing in a time and place marked by violence and division. This story emphasizes that communication goes far beyond words, that family can be chosen rather than inherited, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is deciding to trust someone who has every reason to be your enemy.